Hello, hello. Welcome back to Hitchcock at Home. Today we're going to do some food experiments with beef. So beef is one of my favorite meats that I cook at my house. And one thing that I recently, I woke up thinking about this first thing in the morning. Can I prepare a chuck roast and have it be just as tasty and tender as beef short ribs? So beef short ribs are one of my current favorites. I like to get the ones where you have a lot of meat to the ratio of bone. But the only problem with the short ribs is the cost. Typical cost on the short ribs, and again, this depends on where you live and where you can buy them, I think ranges kind of from $5 to $10 a pound, depending on a number of factors. Whereas for comparison, the beef chuck roast, I think, and again, depending where you buy it and where you live, you can easily get anywhere from $3 to $6 a pound is completely normal. So what I'm trying to decide today is it worth paying extra to get the beef short ribs, or can you take the same recipe, prepare it the same way, and make your beef chuck just as tasty, tender, and delicious, but this costs a lot less? So my plan for today's recipe is I'm preparing the beef almost exactly the same as my Instapot beef short ribs video. Check up above and you should have a link for it. But the difference is I'm not using the Instapot. I'm going to cook it in my two most similar skillets. These are both cast iron. One is enamel, that's the Blue Lake Rosette, and then the other one's just a Loge cast iron. And those are about the most similar that I have to have this food experiment today. First things first, I do have about 2 pounds of the beef chuck and about 2 pounds of the beef short ribs. I'm using the same honey, the same ginger, the same soy sauce, bone broth, garlic, and just a touch of oil. Everything's exactly the same as the last time I did this for you. So about the only thing different we're going to do to the beef chuck roast is we're going to cut it into some similar pieces, so that way it'll be much more the same shape as the short ribs here. That's going to give them, I think, both pieces of meat the most equal opportunity for comparison. They're both going to get the same marinade, they're both going to get seared before they get put in the oven, and they're both going to have lids and be cooked low and slow, about 3 to 4 hours, 250 degrees Fahrenheit. Let's get started. So now regardless how you're making the beef, when I'm doing a nice low and slow cook, I always try to look for the meat that has a lot of fat marbling in it, a lot of fat to meat. That's going to give you a lot of flavor. It's going to give you a lot of tenderness as it cooks and a lot of the good juices. So now the beef ribs, again, I like to pick the ones also that have a lot of meat to bone ratio. The bone here in the short rib is something that's supposed to give you some extra flavor. But what I want to know today is how much of this extra flavor from the bone is worth the extra dollars per pound. So of course, before we brown both pieces of meat, we're going to salt and pepper everything. We are now salt and peppered, and I think we're ready to sear. Both skillets will start with a touch of canola oil. And we're going to let the browning commence. So the process of browning the beef, this is called the Maillard reaction, M-A-I-L-L-A-R-D. This is where we are searing off essentially some of the sugars in the meat, such that it's going to impart a lot of flavor in the finished product. And this is something that you want to do for a lot of steaks and roasts alike. You can flip after about 2 to 3 minutes on each side. So I've just pulled the beef chuck and the short ribs off of the stove. So they've had all 6 sides on each piece nicely browned. And for comparison, you can see the dishes. The beef short ribs, this one right here, had a lot more fat render out. While the meat was cooking, I did punch out my crushed ginger and I put my garlic through the press. Now I'm going to add some beef broth into these, whisk, and get all the good bits off of the bottom of the pan. I'm not measuring, but I started with about a quart, and I'm dividing it fairly equally. Now I'm adding in the ginger. I'm adding the garlic. I'm adding in some honey. And we're adding in about a 1/4 cup or 2 ounces of the soy sauce. Now we're going to whisk everything together and we'll put the meat back in very shortly. We've got our flavorful aromatic broths for both sides now. This smells super good. I really wish Smell-O-Vision existed so you could share this with me. All right, again, beef is going back in. So now we're going to add the lids onto both roasts. So they're going to go into the oven. Again, we're doing low and slow, 3 to 4 hours for 250 degrees Fahrenheit. Ready. There they are. They both fit just barely. I will move them about halfway through the cooking time just to switch the order. And now we wait. It's been about 3.5 hours and I'm ready to take both roasts out of the oven right now. So now to ensure both roasts have the maximum time to reabsorb any of the juices, we're gonna leave them with the lids on and let them rest for about 20 to 30 minutes. I think I've mustered as much patience as I currently have. It's been about 15 minutes. I'm gonna crack these open. So this one had the beef chuck roast in it. Ooh, look at all that color. And this had the beef short ribs. Take a look at this close-up. So here is my less expensive beef chuck roast, and here is my more expensive beef short ribs. They both look absolutely delicious. The question of the day though, can we use a less expensive beef chuck roast and treat it just like we would short ribs and get an equally delicious, equally tender, as if we spent the more money and bought the beef short ribs? Let's find out. Something else I just noticed, our beef chuck shrunk a lot less than our short ribs. Our short ribs are almost half the size now because they've had so much of the fat render out. And just again for comparison, we started with just under 2 pounds of each. They were about 1/10 of a pound difference in the beginning. Very good sign. The beef chuck is very tender, and the last piece fell apart on me. Another very good sign. I can feel these bones trying to fall out of the meat. I think both of these are fall apart tender. They've both cooked up perfectly. Now, something to note, we have all this delicious cooking liquid here behind us. If we want, we can cook it a little bit more on the stovetop, reduce the quantities so that it becomes a thicker glaze. The sugars from the honey are really going to help with that. Our sauce now has reduced to about 1/3 of what it was. The way that I like to tell if it's done, I take a spoon, give it a quick stir, and see what sticks to the spoon. And then you give it a quick taste test. A little salty, but this is really good. How delicious does all of this look? So just from touching it, I can feel that the short ribs seem to be more tender than the beef chuck. My guess on why that is the beef chuck overall had a lot less fat marbled through it than the short ribs. The short ribs, I think that is why they're going to be more tender, is because they have a lot more fat in them. Even though they did cook out and they cost more, so you got less at the end, I think this is going to be our winner. I don't even need the knife for this. So here's our beef short rib. The outside has just a little bit of the crispiness from when we started by browning it. And the meat feels like it is so succulent, so juicy. I feel like it is kind of falling apart as I take a bite. So next, here is our beef chuck. So this is also very tender. It has a little bit of that similar feeling on the outside. The texture of the beef is a little bit more shreddy, a little bit less melty. It's a pretty close comparison though. I'm actually very happy with this. So now, I guess to answer our question, can we take the less expensive roast, the beef chuck roast, which again, normally I feel like I can find for $3 to $6 a pound, depending where I shop, versus the beef short rib. And again, the short rib, I would say I typically $5 to $10 a pound is a pretty normal price where I shop. I'm not disappointed with the beef chuck, but there is a tangible difference in how it melts in your mouth with the short rib. This was a really fun experiment. I hope you enjoyed learning more about beef and if you can make the substitute. Again, I totally would do this again with the beef chuck, but it is just a little bit different than the short rib. The short rib really does melt in your mouth. Please like, subscribe, and share. I'd love to see you again soon. Thank you for watching Hitchcock at Home. Bye-bye.